Welcome back. Essentially, it's after 7 o'clock and we're the first segment for today. And joining us for this conversation, we have Dr. Leroy Almendarez, Executive Director for Beltraide. We have Monique Usher, Acting Manager for the SBDC, Small Business Development, Belize City. And we also have visiting our speaker for EntreCon, Dr. Kent Wessinger. Good morning and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Now, let's just start off by framing the conversation, talking a little bit about why you're here, and put it in the context of where we intend to go with Beltraide and the SBDC.
Sure. So it's the 4th National Entrepreneurship Convention. So it's the 4th year Beltraide SBDC is doing this event. And this is an event that looks at creating a platform for entrepreneurs, business persons, and stakeholders to come to share ideas, to highlight some of the new investment opportunities, business opportunities, and also to create a network where we can share information. And so this year's theme for EntreCon is Innovation and Knowledge Transfer, Drivers of Competitiveness. And so this year we have 2 international speakers. We have Dr. Kent Wessinger and we also have Mr. Gregory Burge, who is a wealth advisor. So we invited Dr. Wessinger to come in to speak to us on how millennials can assist with driving competitiveness. And so Beltraide extended invitation to stakeholders, and Galen University had shared contact with Dr. Wessinger, and so we invited him to participate in this year's entrepreneurship convention.
Can I go back a little?
Yeah.
This EntreCon word, what is EntreCon?
EntreCon is a combination between entrepreneurship and convention. So we have our marketing team that's very creative, and they decided, you know what, a catchy way to have the audience be familiar with the event is to coin it as EntreCon. And so it's an entrepreneurship convention that we dubbed EntreCon.
Oh, okay.
And you use also the term millennial. So let's start off talking there before we get into Dr. Wessinger and his reason for being here. Define that for us, because very often those are terms that, you know, are used globally, but we want to frame it in terms of a Belizean context as well. Are we witnessing the rise of the millennials in Belize?
That sounds dangerous.
But if you look at Belize in terms of our, in terms of age range, a lot of Belizeans fall in millennials. And so when it comes to millennials, we're essentially the drivers and the leaders of Belize.
What age range?
We're looking at age ranges from 1982.
Well, 1982, some people say 82 to
2000.
Some say 81 to 1997, because there's another generation after that. You see, so imagine, and I just wanted to jump in here, but imagine that kind of energy and the energy that exists within these millennials. In other words, they see the world in a different way. Their prism of the world is completely different. And so they're drivers, because the generation before the baby boomers and the Xers and some of these who are used to doing things in a more manual way, they're more technologically driven. And so the social media platforms and all of those
Television.
Television.
For Belizeans.
Technology.
Yeah.
And so they are very driven. And here is a case where diversity exists, but if diversity is not bridged, you will end up with an issue, because they are looking for productivity, whereas some people see them as lazy, as Doc would tell you. They see them as lazy. You know, their minds continue to work. And because their minds continue to work, it means they want to be far more engaging. They don't want to be fixed in an 8 to 5. They don't want to be fixed, in other words, so task-driven, that kind of thing. They want to use their, you know, their innovative energies in order to see things happen, but still, not only still, but maintaining and ensuring there's an even more competitive environment.
One of the things about, I'm trying to combine the 2 things, what the definition you just gave us and the economic reality in Belize. One of the things that we have here is sort of a cap on opportunities. It doesn't seem to have the same potential as other countries, particularly when it comes to economic activity.
Right.
How does being a developing country, I want to say third world very badly.
Don't say it.
And I won't. But being a developing country,
Right.
and having those challenges, are our millennials almost facing a crisis?
I wouldn't say that, because the reason is there was a time when we didn't hear this word globalization, which is now a bad word for some people. But we live in a global marketplace. So even as a professor, as I know, Doc and I, I still teach, and I was a professor. It is a case where when you teach, you don't teach them just to pass a course. You don't teach them just to survive domestically, because you live in a global marketplace. The same skills, the same knowledge, the same level that is a challenge out there. That is what you want to make sure that you're promoting here as well. That's what you're delivering. Now let's look at the economic reality. Yes, there's a drift between first and third. You said you want to use third. We prefer developing, because you have emerging economies. And if you look within these small economies, some are even less developed in that developing continuum. So in our case, now remember what we're talking about here, entrepreneurship. So we're talking about a case where from concept, you can conceptualize an idea, and conceptualizing that idea, that means you have the vision to see it to some reality. And the more far-fetched, which are the millennials, they might have far-fetched or sound like far-fetched ideas, but because our minds are not able to grasp what they're conceptualizing, sometimes that becomes a challenge. But look at the global marketplace. Look at what's competing. Look at the businesses that are surviving. If you look at it, some people would have said, man, that's a very crazy idea. Or we thought that was a very crazy idea. Those crazy idea thinking people are now millionaires and multimillionaires. You see?
Yeah. And I would add to it that, and again, I don't like the term third world either, but I'm going to use it in this context, if you don't mind. Developing nations are at a place where there is a mandate, and I would say it may be at the highest priority, that we have to retain our millennial residents because of just what Doc just said. Think about this. In 30,000 participants in the research project that I started last year, the first question is, what's the first word that comes to your mind when you think of a millennial? Okay, there's two surveys. There's one that's asked specifically to millennials. There's one asked specifically to non-millennials. For 2 years, the top 3 answers in the non-millennial survey has stayed the same. So remember, what's the first word that comes to your mind when you think of millennials? Non-millennials, first 3 terms, entitled, lazy, selfish. The first 3 terms that come to in the research about millennials, the way they see themselves, innovative, creative, smart. Yet, we have this phenomenon. We have millennials migrating at a higher rate than the demographics did before them. And the question then becomes, why? Why are they migrating? Well, at the core of that, it becomes self-growth. But even deeper in the core, it becomes about creative, innovative, smart. Millennials know and recognize they have innovative ideas of value that can matter, that can elevate the culture, can elevate the community. But if there's not environments or opportunities for them to create and be innovative and use that perspective and insight that they have, they migrate. Now, the problem with that is when they migrate, they don't just go and shut down innovative, creative, smart. They go and they take those, they position themselves in environments where those things are accentuated, and they become innovators, creative, and very, very productive citizens in the cultures that they go to. And the people that miss out on are the nations and the cultures that they're from. And so in order for this globalization, whether we like this term or not, and for this to have the rise and the merit that it does, we have to understand that our millennials have great value in all of our cultures. But if we don't retain them, we're going to find ourselves in a greater level of crisis. And again, I don't like this terminology, but the haves are going to gain and the have-nots are going to lose. And I see this right now as an even playing field where if we keep our millennials, we can keep pace and we can continue to develop and grow.
This is not a new trend, especially for Caribbean peoples, where the brightest of the brightest for your nations simply migrate.
True.
Because it's often viewed as the lack of opportunities where they exist. We live in a technological world, and as we're moving towards a more global marketplace, do those opportunities exist now, even though in a greater way wherever you are, that you don't need to migrate?
They do. education is a good example of this. We're both in the education field. Millennials are reconstituting the structure of education just because of the advent of technology. Now a millennial doesn't have to leave the culture of the nation they're passionate about in order to get the degree, the education that they need. They can stay home, they can use podcasts, all different types of technology outlets to be able to elevate their game. The problem then becomes, though, if they do not have an environment, if they do not have open doors from government policies, they feel like their ideas, their innovation, their creativity is suppressed. No matter what kind of education, no matter what kind of degree, no matter how wise, smart, creative they are here, if that cap is placed on their lives, they're going to continue to grow. I think the difference between, I think the difference between right now we called it the brain drain for a long time, that happened in the past, is the fact that we're saturated with technology and everyone has access to it. So.
But just to add to that as well, and then we talk about brain drain, but remember some people when they brain drain, they were millennials then, they're no longer millennials. And so therefore, now when you concentrate on this demographic, because if you don't understand this demographic, there's a new generation after the millennials, there's Gen Z as well. And if you don't incorporate Gen Z, now think about that. That demographic plus Gen Z, that's a younger population, that's a more innovative, they're less patient. They're so technologically driven, and indeed, they are more savvy. The way they look at business, not only that, as a consumer or a producer, you must understand how to satisfy them. And so when you look at those who have migrated, etc., now these millennials, it's not that they want to migrate, but the focus here we must understand is capitalizing on, capitalizing on that intellectual property. You want to capitalize on their ideas. Remember, there's a saying that says, many of the brightest people, those with the brightest ideas, are 6 feet underground because they never thought their ideas would come to fruition. Now these days, I have spoken to them. You know, you speak to students and they would say, but I have this idea, but I didn't think about it. I didn't bring it about because I didn't think I could get it financed. So there's that constraint. And here is where Doc is saying, we need to create the opportunities. Within Beltraide, there is an ecosystem that exists. An ecosystem goes from training to small business development, and Monique can tell you a whole lot more about that. That small business development center can go from concept, business planning, etc., whatever it is, until a business, but also, you can also tell, because you have to also understand this. For you to be competitive, you can't be one of the masses. You want to be as innovative as possible, even if it's just a matter of changing your strategy. Choose some kind of differentiation strategy where your product can be positioned somewhere in the marketplace that makes you not only successful, but successful as quickly as possible. And that's what the SBDC is about.
Let me ask one question quickly, because when you have terminologies like millennials, generation X, Z, all of that. Yeah. Sometimes for me, it's a little bit of a catch-all kind of, a definition so that people can better maneuver, these people. How is it different being a millennial in Belize as opposed to a millennial in the US or any other place? Especially given the fact that they may not access the Beltraide system, even know of it. How different?
I have, as I teach at Galen, I have 10 students in the MBA cohort this semester. I teach in the entrepreneurial track. So I get the students right at the end of the process where I help them develop their research thesis projects. And one of the things that's important to me is that not be another academic exercise, that I'm able to take their life mission and align it with the way that we're going to finish very strong, so that when we finish, we go into a business, an entrepreneurial opportunity. For the longest time, I taught students at Galen, but I was also teaching students in the States. So I had this seat of perspective that was super interesting. I found the students at Galen to be much more hungry for entrepreneurship.
Wow.
I found them to be much more engaged. I found Belizean students to desire to grow and to move past wherever they were. But I will say the commonality between the two is that millennials seem to not be profit-driven, they seem to be purpose-driven. And all 10 of the research projects that I have at Galen this year are not just about making the individual life better. Not about, I'm going to go out and I'm going to be a multi-millionaire in 5 years. It's about, this is what I can do for my town, my community, my culture, my nation. And I see that happening all over the world with millennials, but in developing nations, especially like Belize, I see that accentuated. So I see that as a positive thing. And so for that reason, Beltraide becomes even more important, because when these students graduate, they're going to need guidance, they're going to need funding, they're going to need open doors, they're going to need relationships. And so when they graduate, they're able to use Beltraide to take things to another level. And that's why the message that I have at EntreCon is titled, Create to Elevate. Because if we're not creating to elevate our culture, our nation, our communities, our cities, our villages, whatever it may be, we're allowing crisis to permeate them. And I hope that answers your question.
I have a direct, almost blunt question. Our economy has not necessarily been booming, and that's just the fact of where we are. Economic growth is marginal. From what I'm hearing from you is that millennials are drivers. They're the energy. Are we saying that we are underutilizing them, we have not been utilizing them, or they have been misfiring in our economic sphere? What are we saying? Bringing the two concepts together, the reality of where we are economically, what the millennials should do, and where we are.
Well, let's look at what you just mentioned. You said the economy is not booming.
No, it's not.
No, that's, sorry, that's relatively speaking. And indeed, we're saying it's not booming. But we have also, as long as an economy continues to survive without having to undergo certain conditions, such as the IMF, etc., and you can take care of goods and services, that is something that you look at. For example, our economy projected to grow about 2%. Most of the world's economy are growing less than 2% or actually negative growth. But let's factor that into now, because the fact that you might have minimal growth, how do you redistribute that growth so that you create economic development? How does it incorporate the millennials? Because that's not what we have to look at.
Yes.
I don't know that we have ever taken a focused look at the involvement of millennials in development. I don't know that we have actually segregated our people demographically into these different groups. Because if you think about it, there is also a GEM report that comes out that looks at small business and its role in an economy. Now, if you have further entrepreneurial development, it means there'll be employment creation. And if you have employment creation, there's less dependency on the government's purse, meaning the government does not have to be the largest or continues to be the largest employer, if you will. So here is a question, here is a situation now where we have to merge that. We have to find a way to ensure that there is some avenue that these ideas, these concepts, once they come to fruition, because remember now, I have a business plan in hand, but I have no finance.
Yeah.
How do I get that finance? And if I have to go to a commercial institution where the interest rates might actually become prohibitive for me, I cannot really afford it. So what do I take? I take my business plan and I set it down somewhere, and that's it for me. Then I say, okay, I need to go back and work for somebody else. See, we don't want that, because the millennials indeed are driven. But that constraint, now you mentioned the first, I don't want to use first and third again. Let's use developing and develop. In a developed nation, you might have greater access to financial resources because there's actually an allocation for that kind of activity. In our country, I think what has to happen, and this is what has to come to light, that there is that avenue, and believe me, we're there. We're there. That's the purpose of, that's one of the major purpose of Beltraide, because even Beltraide's Act was amended to incorporate that, MSME, medium, small, and micro enterprises. So the avenue is there. The question is, if we have 100 ideas, we may not be able to finance 100 ideas, but there's something that says you celebrate small successes, and that's what's going to happen on Friday as well. Because if you have a few entities that are successful, others are willing to take the risk. Another issue that exists is we're risk averse. And because we're risk averse, you know, the last $5 we have under the mattress, we don't want to go and take that out, leave it underneath there. It remains $5 10 years from now.
Yes.
Or a little bit less.
But it's worth far less than $5 10 years from now, you see. So
what, we're fast running out of time, so I want to get into why should people attend on Friday? Because for some people, they look at it as a talk shop. Is there some tangible thing that you can walk away with?
This is the 4th year we're hosting this event, and from our experience, persons who attend these events accelerate their business. You have connections that are made, and you know, we always talk about competition, and we're speaking on competitiveness. And what we've seen from the entrepreneurship convention is that people actually start competing. They're working together to put their business out there. And I just want to touch on, you know, our experience working with clients at the center. What we've noticed is that persons who come in at the center that are younger, those are the persons that are not afraid to take risks. And so, like Doc mentioned earlier, a lot of
have nothing to lose.
Yes. They still have to lose, but they have to gain also in that process. But like Doc mentioned earlier, you know, people talk about, oh, I have an idea, and they don't pursue it. And so when it comes to millennials or younger people, they're not afraid to take that idea to the next step. They're not afraid to invest their time, energy to get that out there. So when it comes to the entrepreneurship convention, it's going to be a roundtable discussion. We have panel discussion that will take place, so you could actually participate in the discussion. We have 2 panel discussion, one that's focused on business internalization and growth. And then we also have a panel discussion that looks at knowledge transfer. And so you could participate in that panel discussion. We have an exposition that runs parallel to the event. So we're showcasing product services of clients of the center, and then also highlighting our sponsors, Digi and Galen and other sponsors at the event. So we have that takes place. We also have a hackathon where we make an announcement. We had high school students and tertiary level students competing, and we posed a healthcare industry problem to them. So last week, Friday, we had the final pitch. And so at EntreCon, we're going to announce the winner of the hackathon event that we had last week, Friday. So there's a lot of things to celebrate at the event on Friday.
One final question for me
Sure.
before we wrap. And I think, Dr. Wessinger, I think this goes to you. I was watching a TED Talk just recently, and it's this older gentleman. I don't know what generation he comes from, but he was one of the advisors for Airbnb, and he was talking about the fact that the way a lot of things are structured, there's a disparity that exists between the generations where you could actually have a synergy, a learning. I've had real life experience. How do I put that into your app, or make you figure that into your application that you're developing? And I ask this question specifically because we're talking about a hackathon, EntreCon, all of this. For someone who may be an older person who may want to go into some kind of entrepreneurial undertaking, this might all be daunting. I don't know the language, so I feel disenfranchised. Is it a situation where by focusing on a particular generation, you're also missing out on the potential that could be harvesting, because you're talking about competing or whatever terminologies you use, where you want synergy at the end of the day. That I can go there, an older person can go and work with a younger group, and you have the results that you want. How do you create that enabling environment, not just for millennials, but for everybody?
Right. And it is an issue, and there is conflict between the demographics and the generations because of what you've just said. There's a lot of people that feel like they've paid a lot of dues and made a lot of sacrifice, but yet now all of a sudden we have this focus on millennials, and they feel a little cheated because they feel they have an innovative idea of value that's been sitting somewhere for many years, but they've never had the opportunity. Now all these millennials are flocking to Beltraide saying, help me, help me, help me, and they feel a little cheated in that process. I get that. That's real. I think that is one of the reasons why, and this is kind of a commercial, I'm going to say this, to be at EntreCon. Because one of the things that I feel like is of the utmost importance, and the reason that I started this research project was because everything I read for a couple of years about millennials, the conflict between the demographics, was based on people's personal perspective, what was happening around the dinner table, what they saw in their community. So I put this research project together to bring real hardcore data about millennials and non-millennials, contrast the two so that people could contrast them, they could see where the mindsets were the understanding, and they could gain a lens of understanding of how to move forward. Now, back to your question. The reason this research and the reason one of the points that I'm going to make at EntreCon is I'm going to give people a model to grow. You can be a millennial or a non-millennial, but a model to grow in an entrepreneurial opportunity. But we cannot forget about millennials as far as a customer base. Remember, the largest population sect on the planet today. They have the highest annual purchasing power ever recorded. 72% of all technology positions on the planet today are held by millennials. So if a baby boomer says, I have an idea, and I want to take that idea, and I want to grow that idea, they're not going to omit the largest, most profitable customer base there. And so one of the things that I'm going to do is talk about the buying tendencies, the stimulations, the bruises, all of those things to give people a model to grow with real hardcore data so that no matter who you are, you can take your idea and you can grow it to the place that you believe it can go.
My final question is, I'm picturing in my head my experience with the entrepreneurial world in Belize. And I cannot say that innovation is the first word, the third word, or the 15th word to come up when I think about entrepreneurship in Belize. We're talking about from where I sit, and you are in a better vantage point, that where we are is, I don't want to simplify it too much, but we're in a position where one person opens a gacha shop and you have 3 gacha shops. We're not thinking about coming up with a new kind of food. My question is simplest. And it ties back to what William was asking about, just in terms of a talk shop. All change is made by the unreasonable man. And we will only get to see that we're making progress when we have proof of a radical change in our economic stance. Are we far off, and can we say that we will never get to as radical as we need to get to push this economy to a different level, where we're going to see the new Airbnb coming from Belize, or the new Uber coming from the Belize? Can we make such a radical shift to change and rely on a generation economically that in Belize, we tell seen and not heard?
True. You see, that's a part of the issue. Remember, let's take this, and one of my favorite people is Albert Einstein, and I bring him up in this context. If you observe Einstein's behavior from an organizational behavior point of view, you would have thought he was crazy. Many times in school, some of the very creative minds, kids who have certain energies that they're portraying, and because you think that they're being rude, etc., so you sit down. No. What you have just done is take away their productivity. You've also taken away their power to think. Remember, in schools, in many cases, teachers used to say, tell me how I told it to you. Regurgitate it to me. Rather than conceptualize it and use critical and higher level thinking in order to reproduce it for me. That's a part of the issue. That thing about the gacha shop, that is such a reality. What I've tried to do and what we have to do is to let them know that if you can come up with a more innovative idea, or if you find a way to differentiate that gacha shop, you will survive. Because before you know it, remember, when it's 1, profit is 100%. But 2, profit starts to be redistributed until it reaches a point where you actually fall off the market because there's no more profit. People don't want to diversify because they're afraid, you say co-compete, they're afraid to compete. Because that's a lack of competitiveness. I must know when a market is saturated and when to get out. And how do I get out? Diversify my product. And you know what will happen? You become a market leader. And that's a part of the issue. So radicalizing it, the radical mind will create a radical environment. The radical environment will bring about a radical change in our macroeconomic development. but they all have to be incorporated.
They do.
And it's looking at touching on avenues and resources. Like for us at SBDC, we recently did a national entrepreneurship roadshow. And we catered to high schoolers and tertiary level students, and it's encouraging them and fostering and creating that entrepreneurial mindset. So it's something that has to be in the education system to have them see that, you know, owning your own business is a viable option. You don't have to stick to the status quo or what we're conditioned to think. Okay, you go to school, you get good grades, you get a good job. Looking at creating that shift in the mindset, and that's one of our focus at the centers too. And hence the reason we have initiatives like this that foster, encourage, and promote entrepreneurship and looks at tapping into innovation.
Awesome. And I like that you're mentioning that. Unfortunately, we're out of time, because I think that's one of the main directions that we have wanted to go. Look at what our educational system is putting out, and the messages, and you know, especially what they're being taught, and how you know, very often they don't want to do something because they don't feel as if though, you know, it has been championed enough within the formal structure. You want a job, how much experience you have, and I'm fresh out of school. You know, kind of thing. But EntreCon, time, is there a cost? You know, etc.
It's the 30th of November. It's this Friday. It's at the Best Western Biltmore Plaza. We are starting at 8:30 registration. The cost is $50. It provides you access to the event. You get a T-shirt, because on that day we spoke about an entrepreneurship ecosystem, and essentially that day we're an ecosystem. So it provides you access to the events. And the event is made possible through our sponsors. We have partnered up with Digi. They are our diamond sponsors, Galen University. We also have silver sponsors such as US Embassy, DFC, Belize. And we have other agencies and offices that are supporting the event. So we're encouraging you, if you're listening at home, give us a call at 223-3195. We still have some spaces available, and we look forward to hosting you at EntreCon this year and having you be a part of the conversation, because that's essentially what EntreCon is about, having persons feel that entrepreneurial spirit.
And we want both of you there.
I like it. I like it.
Both of them.
And they're not millennials.
Not even close.
We want both of you there.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us this morning, and we wish you all the best with EntreCon 2018.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to go ahead and take a break, and when we come back, we'll be joined by representatives from the Belize City Council to get a latest update. Don't go anywhere. Open your eyes continues after these messages.